So thank you for being here. This is week 8 out of week 12. So we've covered a lot of different topics so far. And actually all of the conversation so far has been really presenting versus a conversation where people listen. So this is the first one of the next like 3 that will be like that. So very excited to have you both here. For those in the audience that aren't familiar, Harry is VP of Strategy at Grid, and Taras is SVP at Core Scientific. So 2 really great Bitcoin mining companies in North America, in US mainly. So guys, thank you both for being here. Very excited to talk through mining with both of you. So how this is going to be structured is I'm just going to ask you some questions about what you've been doing, your mining ops, and I think we can dig into a lot of different topics that I think will be really interesting to everyone listening. So to get started, can you tell me about your journey into mining and what your companies do? Who wants to go first?
Harry?
Sure.
Potter.
So, my journey into Bitcoin, I think, is very typical, which was like, drug dealers and, anonymous, and like, these were all my friends who like had dealt with Bitcoin, like no knock warrant. A kid was an anonymous. They were going after Scientologists in high school. I was like blissfully unaware, playing Magic the Gathering. And like this kid was like the Bitcoin kid who I met who did this stuff. College, it was Silk Road. Out of college, it was like financial degen stuff in like 2015, 2016. All of which I should have been buying Bitcoin, none of which I was buying Bitcoin. And then got bit by the bug and haven't looked back. So it was a very sort of classic approach to Bitcoin, the asset. But my journey into mining was, I don't think there is a typical journey into mining. When I got into this, I was, doing a little bit of some independent research into ASICs and just trying to understand if, the efficiency curve and some sensitivity analysis around price versus hash. And I was fortunate enough that some of that research got me in the door at Grid, and I had the opportunity to join as the first employee in the business. But 2.5 years ago, I didn't know anything. I basically thought that a mining operation was 5,000 outlets, and like that. Yeah, we're just gonna plug everything in. It's gonna work. No understanding of the complexity, no understanding of the, just the kind of bricks and sticks nature of the business. We've since come a long way, but I think that what's been important for me to remember, and I've been saying it a lot recently, is like, there are no experts yet. All the experts are getting forged right now. Mm-hmm. You can go, if you spend 2, 3, 4 years of like obsessive attention to a single piece of the mining stack or a single piece of the Bitcoin stack, you will be the global expert in that piece of this industry in a very short period of time. And I think
the keyword is a trigger for sure.
Yeah. But that's my story about how I got here. What Grid does and what we do is, we're an American infrastructure company that sources and monetizes low cost power. We become sort of the backbone of the electrical grids that we operate in. And our goal is to be the best customer on the planet for these, utility and power generators. And what we're able to do by being that best customer in the world is build, some of the best Bitcoin mining operations on the other side of those electrons.
Awesome.
That was good. Good summary led into the plug. Very nice.
Plug.
Yeah. So my journey into the rabbit hole, I guess also similar to Harry, like, I'd heard rumors and dabblings and, post undergrad, some of my buddies who were into like the dark web and Silk Road, and I just kind of shook my head. They're like, it's crazy, this Bitcoin stuff, untraceable. And I'm like, I dismissed it at first, candidly. Then I got into grad school, and in the MBA program, some of the finance guys were all about it. And, I was told to buy at 600, at 500. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm focusing on exams. I'm poor. They're like, oh, just take $5,000 and throw it in. I'm like, I'd rather pay off my student bills. Post grad school, went into investment banking, covering traditional mining, which is actually very interesting because it's heavy capex, large scale projects, depreciable assets, long future forward pricing to basically figure out what NPV is for an operation like this, environmental studies, tons of engineering, hated rocks, didn't care. Was really good at the modeling component, but just hated rocks. I was like, I'm a tech guy. I'd been working for a bunch of tech companies before grad school, got into tech investment banking. Did 2.5 years there, traditional MRR, like monthly recurring revenue multiples, ARRs, and all sorts of analysis paralysis to try to hawk companies and different financial products. Got bored, decided not to stay in the industry. And when I left in 2017, a friend of mine was at Jax or Decentral in Toronto, the hot wallet, one of the original hot wallets that was used widely. And I was just looking for something in the tech space to get my hands dirty and my feet wet. And I was like, yeah, crypto had been following, had been very interested. And they're like, listen, we're hiring, we'll bring you on board. So I got my first exposure there to the insanity of altcoins at pre-peak and then into the peak of 2017, 2018. And then through one form or another, a friend of mine had worked with a private family office in the Caribbean, had left Canadian Bay Street, like big corporate law, to go become GC for his private family office. And sure enough, a couple months later, after working at Jax, they're like, listen, we've been going through LinkedIn. You're the only person that had capital markets, crypto, and legal background. I have a law degree for some ungodly reason, but they're like, we need you to come on board. I'm like, why? We're building crypto mines. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, all we have is a bunch of engineers. They can't figure out the financial models on it. We need somebody who can kind of come help us crank deals. So sure enough, my wife and myself, we actually left Canada, packed everything up, threw it on a container, and moved to Antigua. And for the next year and a while, I was working to build what was at the time probably the largest independently owned crypto mining fleet. So came in, brought the very first technical financial perspective to be able to compare a facility in Norway versus Kazakhstan versus China versus Northern Canada, Georgia even. And I spent 2018, 2019 really traveling the world, visiting facilities, kicking tires, shaking hands, kissing babies, structuring deals, closing deals, and then deploying ASICs with our vendor partners. And funny enough, that parlays into how I met Core, because Core, I'd visited several sites across the United States at that point. And when I met Core, the team, Darren, Russell, really hit it off. And when I went and visited Marble, this site was nowhere near as developed as it was now, but in comparison to the ramshackle facilities I've seen in other parts of the world, where you've got 20 kV lines going through open water and like adiabatic cooling that's like spraying water into transformers and switchgear, and like no one's batting an eye, and then you come to a facility like what we have at Core, I was like, yeah, these guys are expensive, but sign me up. And they became my largest client or vendor partner. And I was their largest client. And that's really how I got introduced to Core. And so I got my hands very dirty, got to see some really cool installation operations all around the world. And, when I got the offer to come join Core over a year ago now, I mean, I'd been working with several different stealth projects globally on like platforms and exchanges and custodian services, but I couldn't turn down the opportunity to work with the Core Scientific team. They really do build properly. We are the largest customers for our utility partners. And yeah, they view us as long-term partners, not flash in the pans. The way we build, it's heavy CapEx. And this is one of the reasons why I love mining, is because we're literally the bridge between taking electrons, as Harry mentioned, converting into something useful, and then digitizing it for a value, for an asset that's exchange of consideration or value. And we're that middle ground where you have to take a ton of CapEx, a lot of engineering, real work to convert that esoteric electron into something that we call the blockchain, right? So I love the fact that that's really that bridge. And the other part of it is the amount of capex that's required for mining. It's building roads and bridges. We are the infrastructure for technology 2.0. And it's not just for the financial markets, it's really for all sorts of asset tracking and management. So when people only talk about the financial component of blockchain, I have to always remind them that there's a lot more to blockchain than just value exchange. So hopefully that was a little bit insight into how I got into the space.
That was awesome. And I think that, one thing that you said is really important is mining is really just the most perfect competition that has ever existed, right? And so both of your companies have figured out a way to make that competition successful, and that's really cool. When we think about setting up a mining operation, there's a lot of different things that you have to think through. So I think let's start with the P word, procurement. It's a big topic for miners on so many different levels. You have to have a strategy for it. I think there's two main things that we think about procuring, right? There's the energy side, like we talked about a little bit, but there's also the hardware side. So can we talk a little bit, like dive in, double click into the energy side, and then we'll get into the hardware side. So Harry, specifically for you, how have you been able to source the many different types of energy that you've sourced? And maybe like if you can provide like locations, et cetera, like broadly without giving away too much information.
Yeah. I can't give away locations, but
okay.
But
competition.
The way that we think about energy is that it's fundamentally a relationship game. That to really dig in to developing a long-term and sustainable relationship with a power provider. It's about trust. It's about clarity on the future. It's about being a predictable partner. It's about being a high integrity operator. And I think that certainly Core has benefited from this. Certainly we have benefited from this. But like, there's a lot of flash in the pan mining operations. There's a lot of fly by night stuff. There's a lot of bad actors, intentionally or unintentionally, who blow up some of those relationships and give a sort of a bad name for a Bitcoin mining energy customer. And so, the way that we've been solving this, is very simple, which is like set realistic goals and achieve them. Mm-hmm. So, at the height of early 2018, we started having conversations with folks who'd been, getting inbound that said, I'm not coming for less than 100 megawatts. And we showed up and we said, well, we've never built one of these before, so can we have 5? And Bitcoin price was 20K, and then Bitcoin price goes to 3K, and all the people saying, I'm not getting out of bed for less than 100 megawatts, they're not answering any emails or calls, but we're still knocking on the door saying, we still want that 5. And just that kind of 12-month process of setting a goal, buying the power, building the site, getting operations stood up as our first location, built us a tremendous amount of credibility with that partner and built a reputation that we were able to then carry forward into sort of the next, utility conversation, some of the, energy generation partnership conversations. And then the other piece is that, we feel that we have an enormous business model strategy advantage where we're a vertically integrated self-miner. We have been from the first day that we were born. We've doubled down on that thesis time and time again, and that's unlocked an operating model with some of these electrical partners that's let us sort of in the door and serve a function as a better customer for them in some cases, where I think other miners, whether they're running more of a hosting model or their investors have different priorities, might not be able to run with some of the variable load stuff that we're able to do. So I think that we've been, by continuing to double down on sort of our business model approach, it's opened avenues with some of these power partners. But like, I cannot stress this enough, that power is a local game. It is about getting in bed with a community, becoming a part of that community, and being a good corporate citizen, in that environment. So there's really sort of 3 parties. There's you, the miner, there's the power company, and there's the place that you're operating, and you need buy-in across the board to build the most successful version of your mine.
Mhm. So, Harry, when you say something like variable load, can you explain that to everyone that's on the call?
Yeah. So, so the electrical grid is not designed to provide energy for the amount of energy that all of its constituents are using at any given time. The electrical grid is designed to manage sort of the edge cases, right? So the polar vortex is the example that I use that a lot of folks typically remember. But the polar vortex put a tremendous amount of strain on the electrical grid. And so the way the power agreements work is that your utility has an obligation to deliver power to your household, which means that, let's say there's 100 households in the region, and there's 100 units of electricity being generated. And those 100 households typically maybe use 50. And so there's some room in the system. There's a lot of flex. So we'll come in and say, we want the other 50. You're usually not using it. We want it. Let's get to a good price on it. And the energy company says, that's great, but you can't put us in a position where we'll be in violation of the contracts we have with each of those households to deliver, high quality uptime service. And we say, okay, well, as long as you price that power the way that we want you to, we're willing to give that power back in a scenario where there's constraints somewhere else in the system. Mm. And so, then we get through 97% of the year, or 99% of the year, or 80% of the year, maybe. And, based on the environmental conditions of the rest of the grid, one eye, not two, that will dictate how we utilize the power that's being offered to us. And we're able to strike more flexible deals that way, because we have a business model that allows for it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So Taras, that's an interesting topic for you guys, right? And like Harry said, like for him, it works really well because he self-mines. You have a lot of clients, and I think a lot of your role is working with a lot of Core's clients. One thing to get back to like the procurement side, how were you guys able to scale in different states? Like, did you have to have that same type of approach where you had to approach the local government, right, and have that good relationship with the power markets? So can you tell me a little bit about the different scaling mechanisms that Core has had, and were there any like complications or differences that you had to address when you were scaling?
So I can speak in generalities right now, because we made an announcement a few weeks ago around SPAC transactions, so I can't speak in specifics explicitly. But what I can speak to is really how a miner should be viewing these types of conversations. And I mean, Harry hit a bunch of the points head on, and it really is about being a good partner. You can't be viewing an energy utility as purely a client-vendor relationship. You are in it for the long term. Typically, when a large-scale miner enters into a PPA, which is a power purchasing agreement, these are long-term contracts with big dollar values behind them. And so if you're approaching a utility, regardless of the state, and they view you as a short-term partner, you're gonna have a bad time, right? So you really need to show that you've got a management team that's credible, you have a balance sheet that is sustainable, and you're gonna do what you say you do, and then actually get it done. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think a lot of success has been had in how Core has grown over the years, in that when we go into a community, we are creating real jobs. The facilities we build are stable facilities. We don't have issues with like some other operators may have had in the past. And it's stable management. You can find where our team is online. We're audited. You have to make sure that as a good corporate citizen for that community and that utility, you check all the boxes, because there is demand and there's quite a bit of competition for this power. Everyone's looking for low cost power. Utilities know that, the power developers know that. And so for them, when they're going through their own matrix as to who they want to work with, you really need to show that you are the partner that they can sleep well at night with, right? I'm not going to say get to bed with like Harry, but certainly a long-term stable partner for them. And so you have to understand that it is a local game. So you have to play by the rules that they set. The more you can hire locally on a construction basis, the better you are. The more skills training you build in the community, the better you're going to end up in the near term, based on the contracts you can sign, but also candidly for the longer term, because then you're developing the HR resource that you need to staff your own facility. Unlike grid, course facilities are large scale. We don't have a single facility or site that's under 100 megawatts right now. We're all in the United States, which is great because it really does have a massive material impact to a lot of these communities that, candidly were underperforming based on the move out of large scale manufacturing. And so that's really how I'd recommend any large scale miner or even hosting partner to position, is that it's a long game. You really need to show that you're there to build and stay, not just build and flee. Um, and really doing all the things that you say you're going to do, because your reputation will precede you, especially in the power game. The power industry is a big sector because of like the infrastructure, but it's a small sector because of the people. That industry is very specialized, and you'll notice senior execs moving around between some of the major players, and let's just say that they've got great memories as well, and they'll remember when they've been treated properly and they've dealt with somebody with credibility, versus somebody that has not acted that way. So again, it's a long game. There's no secret sauce, so to speak, but you really need to be focused on doing the right things day in, day out. And that's really where I think Core Scientific has succeeded, because we have built these facilities. Our operational uptime is incredible. And we've become very good partners and stewards within our communities that we operate in.
That's awesome. So that covers the power side. Now we're going to get to the fun part, the hardware procurement side. So at the beginning of this year, right, we all saw that hardware was really difficult to procure because of the supply chain crunch. And that trickled down to all of us, right? It started at the foundry level. We've seen it not just in mining industry, which, is crazy. We saw it in the car industry and all other industries. And then, for us as individual miners, that affected how we can plan out our strategy. So we saw also at the beginning of this year, larger miners buying these big amounts of forward purchasing contracts, right, for mining machines. And we all thought, as long as you have machines available, that will give you a little bit of like strategic edge this year. And then the China exodus happened, right? Something that none of us, I don't think, really thought would actually ever truly happen. Like, we've been teased with it before in China. But now it seems like the shift has gone from hardware is actually relatively easy to get right now, and now having a co-location space is difficult to get. And then that also trickles down to like COVID and having like transformers being difficult to get, et cetera. So Harry, in the time frame, right, from 2020, how were you able to scale with the shift, like the Chinese exodus, and has that affected your business at all?
I'm really of two minds. I think that, from a direct business impact, there's some deal flow, but this was one of those times that we continued to double down on vertically integrated self-mining. There was a lot of chatter around, folks coming out of China saying, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cent power on a hosting deal, 10, 15, 20% type of profit split, which is super attractive. Like, that's an awesome deal. But that's not who we are, and that's not what we're building. And to Taras, what he said, when we get into bed for 5 to 10, plus years on a power contract, that's not predicated on a 1 to 2 year customer. That's predicated on us being able to deliver on that obligation and build an incredible business on the back of that power. So for us, it was an opportunity to reassess our pricing models for hardware, to reassess our procurement strategy. How far ahead do we want to be buying inventory? It continues to make me feel that, and this is, based on the analysis, that like staying nimble with dry powder is a pretty attractive thing to do in this industry. We love being aggressive across the whole efficiency spectrum. We think that there's opportunity at everything from 100 watts per terahash all the way to 29 watts per terahash. That whole range has attractive deal flow within it, as long as you are able to run sort of the diligence process and build and maintain the relationships, because someone's S19 is someone else's S9 coming off the rack. And so, how do we make sure that we're inserting ourselves at sort of the right flow points within the used space, while still making sure that we're investing in the future and investing in the highest efficiency machines available to us as well. So we love being super holistic with our machine blend. We love the opportunity to build systems that are really, really flexible across the different types of SKUs. So, I want there to be no business impact, whether I plug in an S9 or an M31S or an Avalon. We want to have as flexible an operating model to be able to handle any type of hardware, because at the end of the day, the CapEx, Taras said exactly right, that this is a really capital intensive business. But when you break down sort of what those CapEx line items that really drive the budget are, the ASICs is top of that list every single time. And so making sure that we're able to make the best ASIC procurement decision with the least impact to operating model, that's how we're able to continue to kind of scale with as little interruption as we can.
That makes sense. Taras, with the inflow of, like Harry said, of Chinese miners looking for homes, has that adjusted your trajectory at all?
It has been a busy quarter or few months. So yes, core is certainly a key target for a lot of the large scale miners that are coming across. And so just been busy really qualifying, finding out what's real, what's not. There's a lot of issues coming down the pipe, specifically around regulations and how you maintain your own client list. So given we will be a public company shortly, we just have to be careful with how we screen all of our clients, make sure due diligence and AML screens are done. And so that's something that you have to do as a hosting provider versus something that self-miners don't really have to deal with. So yeah, of course, it's definitely top of mind. But I also have to say that there's a lot of interest domestically and also in Europe for large scale mining operations. So while the Chinese exodus is very real, we have to keep in mind that there's a lot of real capital and financial institutions looking at the mining space because of its yield profile. One interesting example is just yesterday on Monday in Germany. There's a law that actually allowed their institutional investors to allocate up to 20% of their AUM. It's approximately 1.2 trillion euro in assets that could be allocated to the crypto market. And there's been a lot of German investors looking at it in a very real way, because if you look at their bond spreads, 90% of the German public bonds are negative yielding.
100.
It could be 100 today. Last time I looked, there was still a few that had some yield or were at zero.
This week.
It's insane, right? And so as rational actors in the financial sector, I have a feeling that there's going to be a little bit of capital flowing into the digital mining space because of the yield profile. Global investors globally are chasing yield, and there's very few places that have the stable, consistent yield profile that a crypto mine throws off. So while the Chinese are obviously looking to reallocate, a lot of other investors are as well. So that's something that folks should be really thinking about in a very real way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We've been seeing that too. For me, I've talked to a lot of different co-location services in North America, and when we think about having clients, the hosting cost has increased, right? From I'd say January till now because of that demand. So last year, BitUda performed a report that said that the median cost of mining is about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. with hash rate shutting down in China, with more and more activity coming online in North America, do we think the cost curve has adjusted? Has it adjusted
Yes.
up or down?
I would say the cost curve has adjusted up materially, and the main reason being isn't because of greedy miners looking to squeeze the ecosystem. The entire global supply chain right now is jammed.
Yep.
You can't get steel, you can't get construction materials. Look at what the price of what happened to lumber, right? Like all of these things are trickling down so that there's a perfect storm on actual capex. And as Harry and I both said over and over, mining is a heavy capex game. Heavy. And like some of these items are long lead time, months in advance.
Mhm.
And so all of these trickle down bottlenecks have materially increased the cost of capex per megawatt build out. And so that's something that folks have to take into account. They're like, oh, all of a sudden we're getting way higher prices than we did 3 months ago. And it's like, well, yeah, go try to buy some structural steel on the market right now. Go try to buy some switchgear. Good luck trying to find a transformer in the next 9 months, right? So all of these things have trickled in. So 100% pricing has certainly increased, but I think an equilibrium will be found over the next, call it 3 quarters, as supply chains kind of stabilize, inventory gets stabilized, and a lot of the facilities that are being built up right now finally come to market, which I'd say in like Q2, Q3, 2022 at this point.
Yeah, we do some research on the public mining companies and their announcements. And at the end of 2022, the announcements have said that there's over 1,000 megawatts of capacity coming online in North America, which is an absolute insane amount. So hopefully those announcements are true. They're true.
What I will say is announcing that you can build a facility of over 100 megawatts and actually building a facility and maintaining and running, two very different things.
Yep,
There's very
absolutely.
few parties and groups that have been able to actually build facilities over 100 megawatts consistently, stably. So I'd be very hesitant around some of those announcements.
And
we're looking forward to joining that list.
Yeah, I think that the cost curve adjusting, though, like getting back to that topic of conversation, you have all these other miners joining that, like you said, it's really difficult to build and it's much more expensive. So, Harry, where do you think the cost curve has adjusted to at this point, and where do you see it going in the future?
I'm much less focused on as with most things, I'm of two minds. The first is that taking China operations offline and migrating them elsewhere is going to raise prices, like full stop. Building a megawatt of operations in China is like half the price of doing it everywhere else. And that's because of a lot of different reasons, but some of them sort of market structural, some of them labor cost, some of them safety related.
Infrastructure build?
The infrastructure build. They're taking that entire segment of the market, which we now know to be about 50% of hash, offline and moving it somewhere else, exactly to Terrace's point. Like all of those costs are going to go higher because the yield on the capex needs to be higher to pay it off. So that's sort of a structural change in this migration that's going to happen. So yes, the curve is going to go up there. I think there's an argument to be made around, is the energy cost as a component going to go up as well? I think also yes. I think the more that we migrate into some of these other regions, it'll go up. I think it's going to rise and then fall as we continue to mature and hone sort of the industry-wide operating models that are being deployed. So I would expect a peak and then a taper. But the other side of, like, you can't talk about the cost curve without talking about the revenue curve as well. And we need to all acknowledge that we went from whatever 8 or 9 cents per terahash per day in revenue to over 30. And so biting the bullet and paying for 5 or 6 cent power all of a sudden isn't so crazy with these S19 Pros coming in at 30 watts per terahash. those have a really long profitability horizon on them right now from what we think. And, and so there's a ton of revenue to be had. So if that means bearing some higher, OpEx in the short to medium term, I think a lot of folks are making that decision. Again, this is why we like to stay nimble in the hardware markets, is because, when that goes the other way, we want to come in and be a strategic buyer of that hash when folks decide that maybe the economic landscape isn't something that works for them at their power cost anymore.
Mm-hmm. And Harry, it wouldn't be a conversation of ours if one of us didn't push back on the other, right? So the thing that I would say there is I agree with you on the revenue side, but on the revenue side, you can't control what everyone else is going to do, right? So if more hash rate comes online, your revenue can significantly be changed.
Absolutely.
But like the cost curve of power is like really important for you to set up an operation that you think is like longer term scalable and sustainable.
Yeah, I'm not talking about what we're choosing to do. I'm talking about where I think the industry is behaving. Yep. So this is a behavioral observation, not a sort of grid business strategy by any stretch. Like our job is to find the absolute, we want to be the miner that shuts off when every other terahash has already gone offline.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not quite there, but I think that we've got a pipeline to achieve that. But this is like with any commodity production business, which Taras knows all too well, it's all about what's the cost to pull it out of the ground. Yep. And the person with the lowest cost to pull it out of the ground wins the day.
Right. That's why I think the cost curve is such an interesting thing, because we have no idea what it is in mining. We can guess and we can like have like a general roundabout number, but because we don't know every single miner on the network's cost of electricity, it's a very interesting topic to see like where you stack up against others.
Yeah, and I want to double click there because I think Taras is going to have something interesting to say that I want to tease out. Is the cost of power gets a lot of airtime in these discussions, but it's not the whole cost structure on the business. There's a lot that goes into this that is not the power bill. Repair and maintenance, labor, uptime, systems, engineering. All of the things that go into like the monthly COGS or OpEx. Like there's a lot of line items that sit below power that are really, really material as well. And so you might have a miner that has a minor edge in power cost, but but if they're not running the rest of the operating model aggressively and effectively, they may fall significantly behind somebody with a slightly worse power cost, which I think that's where a lot of the best miners differentiate, and Core certainly has.
Yeah, and that's where my point really came from when I mentioned there's a big difference when you're operating large scale facilities. Setting up a warehouse with 2 megawatts, 3 megawatts, 5 megawatts, and you have a couple of guys running around pulling units and flipping switches is very different than having a large scale facility with 100,000 units. And this is where it gets into be a very sophisticated technical operation. You need to have thermodynamic and aerodynamic and HVAC studies because when you're dealing with tens of thousands of units, a hot or a heat island within your facility can literally kill thousands of units in a very short period of time if your engineers and your team isn't on top of that. And so at scale, things get a lot more complicated. And that's something that, I'd be I would let the other miners know that you have to be on top of your game, because when you're dealing with other people's units, it becomes a very big liability, especially at scale.
And expensive, right? If you have like credits,
very expensive,
obligated to give back to clients.
Well, yeah, and you're the custodian of their hardware, and right. It's like $7,000, $8,000 a pop. And so, what's your excuse if you've got 1,000 S19s that melt because one of your air ducts wasn't working and that entire area hit 100 degrees for an hour and a half and melted all the PCBs, right? Yeah. Oops. Well, your insurance company's going to ask the same. Like, scale is obviously a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when you do it right, because you get the operational efficiencies to really drive down OpEx. It's a curse because it can get a lot more finicky if you're not doing it properly. And again, if you're not automating a lot of the processes and you literally have folks running around looking for red lights, it becomes a nightmare.
And by the red
So
lights, you mean when the miner is not operating
yeah,
correctly,
minor,
the
and
light-
yeah, that's right. Yeah, the minor warning lights. But you know, core specifically, we spent a ton of capital in developing our own proprietary systems. It's called a fleet management system.
Mhm.
And that really allows us to understand what's going on a very granular basis throughout our entire fleet within the different facilities that we have in operation right now.
And different
Um,
types of machines within that, right?
correct. And I mean, I would be very careful as well if you over diversify your machine types, because if you're working as a tech and you're fixing units all day long and you're dealing with a new unit every half hour, your efficiency on fixing that unit is going to go down a lot.
Mhm.
But if you become an expert in the 19 or 19J or M30 or whatever else, your efficiency can go up materially. And again, it's a throughput, right? The longer your units are off, the longer you're not making money with those units. And so, yeah, we strive for operational excellency. And one of the key pieces of that is making sure that we have consistent units within our facilities.
Mhm.
Um, and that obviously helps us with controlling COGS and OPEX. But yeah, Harry, sorry, you're absolutely right. Like there's a ton of costs that aren't just power. Power is the easy part. Really, if you've got a couple of good electrical engineers, power is the easy part. It's everything else that's hard. Like you look at some of these facilities and they don't have hot aisles, and you're just shaking your head like, what are you doing?
Are you serious?
I've seen facilities without hot aisles, and it's just like, yeah, even how you install the units into the hot aisle wall itself is critically important, because that generates the HVAC control for CFM to go through properly for temperature control. Anyways, I hope that
Oh,
answered the
that's
question.
awesome. And
Yeah.
so when you mean hot aisle, and like this is traditional data center talk, like hot aisle and cold aisles, and it's the way of flowing the air, right, for
Correct.
maximum efficiency of machines.
Correct. So HVAC is basically circulatory system for temperature control and temperature mitigation. So typically, if you look at the boxes behind me, there's a hot aisle, there's a cold aisle that goes in through the center of these boxes, and then the hot is what pushes them all out through the sides. Those are the dampers. Same thing up here on our steeple tower. The cool air goes in through the side, and then passive air cooling brings the hot temperature up to the top. And what that does allows the temperature control to be precise, and actually saves time and cost on not having to install additional CFM or fan systems. I shouldn't use acronyms, my apologies. Yeah, and it really does matter, because your units have an optimal temperature bandwidth that you want to maintain. And if you deviate too far from spec, too cold, which is true, units don't like being too cold, or you go too hot, then obviously you have big problems. I mean, you could melt your units or actually start fires, which is not ideal. No bueno.
Oh, bueno.
No bueno. Exactly.
Very interesting. So we have like, the power procurement, the hardware procurement, the engineering of the site, the maintenance of the site. On the maintenance of the site, so one of the reasons why we put on this whole summer series was really a way for people that were interested in Bitcoin mining to learn more about all like the intricate details about how mining works. But it's really difficult to do that without hands-on experience, right? Like you can sit in these meetings all day, but until you like physically plug in a machine, it's just a very different feel and vibe. So how do each of you find the right people, and how do you staff up your teams? Because it's a whole new world. People don't go to school for mining. You might go to school for like engineering or data center style jobs, right? Or finance. But how do you find the right people to build out these facilities and maintain them correctly? Twitter? Is Twitter the answer?
We actually just hired a tech off of Twitter.
Very nice.
He's awesome. He was like super persistent with me, like gets in the DMs and it's just like, I'm willing to go wherever you need me to go, do whatever you need. I ran the computer lab in my technical school for 2 years. Like, let's do this. So huge shout out to him. But for us, it's about creating a role and a training infrastructure that rewards effort and aptitude over experience. Like, I wasn't a Bitcoin miner 3 years ago, but I'm a Bitcoin miner today. And so how do you take people through that progression and come out, the other side, A, on a compressed time scale, and B, with a really, really specialized set of capabilities that are tailored to the operations that we build and run. One of our site managers, former insurance salesman.
Awesome.
Like, COVID hit his industry hard, and they did layoffs, and we found him, through an agency. He kicked ass every day for 6 weeks while we were doing construction, jumped in, did construction, and then scaled with us as we went live at this facility, and like total no-brainer to promote him to site manager. Wasn't doing anything Bitcoin mining or technical related 6 months ago. So, I think there is a significant challenge around talent in our industry. I think I've given you two of my best anecdotes, but that doesn't staff 100 people. And so there's scale problems around talent, but there's also a really low barrier to entry if there's high effort, high aptitude people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's less of a secret sauce to how to hire good talent, because the data center industry outside of mining is massive. The power sector is massive. And so I like Harry's point on higher aptitude over skill set. I think there's a ton of overlapping skill sets that are applicable to mining, and a lot of the things that are nuanced can certainly be trained. In fact, Core Scientific, we run the Antminer Trading Academy for Bitmain in North America. So if there are specialized skill sets, you can certainly learn them. But engineering, electrical engineering, you find people that are interested in the space with the right skill sets, and you can train them up for the rest of it. Data center, switchgear, all the actual networking stuff and work that has to be done, you can find great people, and then train them up as to what they need. I think it's more the curiosity, intellectual curiosity, that you're really looking to find versus the hard skill set. Because if you find somebody with the hard skill set but without the intellectual curiosity or interest in the space, you've lost, right? So Twitter may be good, but pardon?
You need that grittiness, right?
Yeah, and being able to roll up your sleeves and really learn, right? Versus, I worked for a massive data center company and I've developed, tons of megawatts of data center, which you look relatively or tiny. It's more of, I worked here and I'm really interested in the space and I have the technical skills, but we'll roll up my sleeves. That's the type of attitude that we would love to hire up. And candidly, there's a lot of roles coming up. So please, if you're looking for a job, hit me up. I'll put you in contact with HR.
The only other thing I just want to piggyback on that is that like with most things that I find, like Bitcoin does the heavy lifting for me. And so we're a Bitcoin miner, so there's only so many jobs to work directly on Bitcoin. And so we find that there are people who say, either maybe I would be overqualified or maybe I wouldn't choose to make this leap, but I love Bitcoin and we want to be involved with Bitcoin, so let's come work with Grid. And so, it's one of the reasons why we continue to double down that we're a Bitcoin mining company. That's who we are. And so I think it's been beneficial for us from a talent standpoint as well, that working in this industry is just so much fun.
Nonstop, but fun.
Yeah.
We talked about energy, we talked about hardware, we talked about mining trends, we talked about talent, but last question for both of you, as we have a few minutes left, what does it really take to have a successful Bitcoin mine?
Good people, number one. Access to stable, low-cost power, and then access to a great community that's supportive of it, understands its value, and doesn't get in the way of growth, but also supports by making sure that you have access to the right pool of people within the area. Aside from that, the hardware does most of the rest of the work. So
Yeah, I take a barbell approach. I think there's like two ends of the spectrum that really, really matter, and the middle is kind of a wash. But there's a few key decisions, exactly like Taras said, is that there's a few key decisions that like you make and you have to get right. Cost of power, location, some key, some of the key hires, engineering decisions, the price that you acquire, each terahash at matters a lot. So cost basis matters on the hardware side. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's like discipline. Like being a Bitcoin miner is an incredible, it requires just incredible discipline because it's about getting it right. It's a game of inches. It's about getting it right at the edge. It's about pushing forward, percent by percent by percent. And so, I think it's hard to overstate just how much of a grind like the execution pieces of the business. It's about setting the frame, delivering every day. The rent is due every day.
Amen to that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your insight on the experience that you've had in mining in Bitcoin. I hope this was really beneficial to everyone to listen. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time, we will have a Twitter Spaces where we'll open it up for anyone to ask questions to Taras and Harry. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, folks. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.